Welcome to the Peter Joe Podcast, where we talk about everything from life and mental health to entertainment and passing current events. Thank you for joining us. Let's begin, my fellow Peters. Welcome back to the Peter Joe Podcast. Today we're gonna finish a walk through the Island of Lost. This is part 2. Part 1 was a shit ton of fun to do. I loved recording it, loved researching it, loved making the script for it. I'll start this. I'll preface this with a spoiler alert for those who haven't watched this show, or those who don't like spoilers. There will be slight spoilers in this one. So if you don't care, or if you already saw the show, or if you're just interested in what I have to say about the show, please stay and enjoy. All right, thank you. So welcome to part 2, a walk through the Island of Lost. For those who returned after the first part, thank you for returning. I must have been doing my job right if I got you back here. So the first part we covered was the basis of the main story. Didn't really touch upon the layers of the show, but I'm probably going to touch upon that in this episode more than anything. We also covered the main characters. There's a lot of them, if you recall. So the second part is more of a philosophy point of view within the story, the characters and their inner struggles. Because as you loyal listeners know, I like to touch on mental health and mental struggles because all of us as humans go through it at some point or another in our life. Some more than others, unfortunately. But before I get to the philosophy of it all, I need to talk about one more character. I kind of skipped this character because the character is not your normal character at all. So, like I said, this character is not traditional because the character is the actual island that the show takes place on. I know what you're thinking, Peter Joe is fucking crazy, let me unsubscribe. But for real, the island can be viewed as a character, and even the creators thought so. So let's dive into it. Throughout the show, you see many instances of the island changing perspective by use of creating visions for the people on the island, by use of misconception, trickery, and basically making the characters see things that only they can see. For instance, Jack, who we talked about as the main character, he's the leader of the group, he's the doctor. He keeps seeing who he thinks is his dad, but his dad is actually dead at this point. As I touched upon in the first episode, or the first part of the episode, Jack and his dad had a tumultuous relationship. It was more of instead of a love-hate, it was more of a hate relationship. So his dad is already dead. His casket was on the plane getting flown back home for the burial when the plane crashed. So that's why Jack was actually on the plane in the first place. So Jack early into his arrival on the island, he starts seeing his dad just like walking around the island in the middle of the jungle, by the beach, etc. So Jack keeps seeing his father, but this is actually the island playing tricks on him. So the island is basically taking Jack's I don't want to say worst fear, but one of the big parts of his life and showing him it over and over, like making it seem like his dad's actually alive and walking around on the island. So now you understand what I mean by the island as a character, because this island, like, it has its own, I don't want to say feelings, but it could do things to these characters. Like, it could genuinely trick them. It creates this type of environment. Like, I know in the one episode, there's a fucking polar bear in the middle of a hot island, and it was just a creation because one of the main characters, Michael, his son, is reading a comic book that has a polar bear in it. So the island duplicates this polar bear and puts it on the actual island itself. A lot of weird, tricky shit in the show. Very trippy. So that's why I think the island is actually a character. It should be considered a character. So now let's take a trip down philosophy lane. I'm going to try not to spoil this for those who haven't watched it, but I want to keep it loyal and real for those who did, because I know there's a lot of fans out there. I know a few people that I know personally that'll be listening to this, and I hope they vibe with me here. So the main concept of the story of Lost is a good versus evil. There are many examples of this, so I'll give you a couple. So I mentioned before on the part one, there's a group of people on the island who were already here before the plane crashed. But it's a very big island, so they were in a whole different area of the island, okay? They are referred to as the Others. When we first meet them, we are led to believe that they are actually evil, that they are monsters, that they are not good people. It is true for some of them. Some of them are not good people. But a lot of them are just good people, normal people. So when I was watching the first time, I was rooting against these bastards, the Others. There's also a big flashback during the last season. This is another example of good versus evil. A big part of the story. So, there's these two brothers. It's a way back flashback to I don't remember the year of when this flashback happens, but it's, I believe, hundreds of years ago, okay? So these two brothers, one's name is Jacob. Jacob, he represents life, okay? So he's like the good. And then there's his brother, who goes by the name of the Man in Black. Think of him as the evil Grim Reaper. So you got good versus evil. Both are brothers. One's good, one's bad. I probably spoiled too much, but I have to talk about this. I've heard people call these two brothers Cain and Abel. I'm not too familiar about the story of Cain and Abel, but I know it involves betrayal. So we'll leave that up to your interpretation when you watch the show. So a few seasons into Lost, we learn about the man named Jacob, who is the good brother. The others tout him as the leader. If I recall, Locke, who was my favorite character, goes to talk to Jacob inside of this beat-up shed in the middle of the jungle. Jacob in this episode, he can't be seen, but he's there, almost like a ghostly spirit. It's actually a really creepy scene. The writers do a good job until the end, making this Jacob seem like the bad guy, but in reality, he's the opposite. So those are just two examples of good and evil. The rest you'll catch on to when you watch it or rewatch the show. I am not going to give away the ending, because the ending is... I find it amazing, okay? The hardcore fans find the ending amazing. But the people who beat up on the show, who hate the show or strongly dislike the show, they blame it on the ending, which I still don't get. Why they blame it on the ending, because the ending is pretty clear cut for the main plot of it. Like, they explain the main story behind it. And there is a lot that is left open for interpretation. But that's what makes the show great. You could sit here and talk to someone who watched the show and loves it, and you could talk for hours about the ins and outs of the show, what this meant, what that meant. And it's just fun. It's a really fun conversation. So like I said, the writers make Jacob seem bad. He's actually good the whole time. It's whole trickery. Great writing, though. So I already talked to a couple people about doing an after conversation or discussion about the show. I talked to one of my friends I know, Jason, and we talked about doing a podcast episode discussing Lost after these two parts. So that's in the works. So I want to talk more about this with a friend, because it leads to interesting conversation. And a lot of times you'll agree on things, or you'll be on the completely different end of the spectrum. So yeah, I don't want to ruin the ending, like I said, so we're almost at the ending of this second part. This second part is a lot shorter than the first part, because the first part I was explaining almost every main character, and there's a lot of them, as you learned. And they all have so much going on in their past life and their current life. So I spent a lot of time on the characters because, like I said in episode 1, or part 1 of this episode, the characters are what makes the show run. They are the life force. They're the heart that makes the show beat. So lastly, I want to touch on what I think the title of the show has to do with the message I get from the show, what others get from the show, and what I think the creators wanted the title to mean. And you could go about this from any angle. So you got Lost. It's 4 letters, L-O-S-T, Lost. Very basic name, but like I said, you could take so much from the name of the show. I'll look at a couple angles here. So you can say Lost is titled Lost because it's so mysterious and confusing that it leaves you with the feeling of being lost. I think it's more of a symbol, personally, of the plane crashing and the survivors feeling lost. But I think both of those ideas can go hand in hand, and they're both in play. Like I said, the beauty of the show is it's open for interpretation. In my eyes, there are really no wrong answers into how you break down the show. I also think all of us in life have felt lost at some point, and there's a beauty of feeling lost and finding that light at the end of the proverbial tunnel. I also want to say that my personal connection with the show gives me the funniest mental feeling I've ever had in my life, and this is no joke. I wish I was making this shit up, but I'm not. So I've gone through the show 4 times already, from beginning to end, binged the shit out of it each time, because it's very addicting. So I've gotten through all 6 seasons 4 times and reached the end. And after that last scene plays and the credits roll, I fall into this weird, crazy fog of sadness, of emptiness, because I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I know my ex-wife, it's true for her. Like, we felt so attached to these characters, like we knew them, like they were family or friends. And without spoilers, after the ending, we're just like, oh man, like I get this feeling of like, what am I gonna watch now? Because honestly, I love TV, I love movies, I love cinema, but I feel so empty after the show ends because no show is like Lost. Even if you hate the show, even if you love it, I think we could all agree there's no show like Lost. I don't think... I'm trying to that's the best way to explain how I feel after the ending. It's literally an emptiness. It's a void. Get super sad. Like the first time after I watched the show, I cried. I don't give a fuck. I'm a man. I could admit it. I cried because it just felt so personal to me. And this feeling that people get after they watch it, and I know I get this feeling, it's because of the wonderful writing. It's because of the incredible cast of characters who by the end you feel like you've known them your entire life. They become an extension of your life to a point. And I can't say this about any movie or show I've ever watched, and I've watched a fucking shit ton of them. So that is my take on why the title Lost has such a deep-rooted meaning, has so many interpretations, and such a simple yet beautiful title. And all of that combined makes Lost my favorite show of all time. I will die on that hill of it being the greatest. I shall say I will die on the island that this is the greatest show to ever be written, filmed, and executed. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my deep dive. I could have went deeper. That's what he said. But I got 2 books for you guys to check out. The one is called The Ultimate Lost and Philosophy, Think Together, Die Alone. It was published by Blackwell Philosophy. It covers all the seasons of Lost, but it takes the philosophical approach to it. And then there's another book called Finding Lost by Nikki Stafford. It's a great book that's all about the last season, because the last season is it's deep, it's beautiful. It has so many different meanings, Yeah, so both of those books, let's see, I think they're both over 300 pages, or right around 300 pages, just for a show. And the one is only about the last season. Like, that shows you how deep the show is. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for diving in with me. If you haven't seen the show, I highly suggest you see the show, please, because you're going to love it. I just know. So thank you for taking this journey. Don't forget, stay positive, stay hopeful, stay positively hopeful. All right. Goodbye. Thank you for listening in, my fellow PETAs. Follow me on Facebook at PETA Joe Podcast, all lowercase, no spaces. Instagram, PETA, Joe, podcast, all lowercase letters. And on Twitter, at PETA Joe Podcast, all capitals. Like and subscribe on all the apps the PETA Joe Podcast is streaming on, including Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, Apple, Google Podcasts, Amazon Audible, Samsung, TuneIn, Player FM, and last but not least, Podchaser. Thank you. Thank you for listening in, my fellow PETAs. Follow me on Facebook.